There is a strange strength that enters a soul when the morning begins with prayer instead of panic. Before the noise of the world can touch your spirit, heaven quietly places courage within you. The battles you feared yesterday begin to lose their power when you kneel before God at dawn. Many people wake up checking their problems, but the wise wake up seeking God's presence first. For the one who prays in the morning is not merely starting another day, they are stepping into divine protection, peace, and life-changing authority. There is something deeply mysterious about the first moments of the morning. Before the world begins shouting its demands, before the machinery of human ambition begins to roar, there exists a holy silence that feels almost untouched by earth itself. It is in that silence that many souls either lose themselves or find themselves. Most people rush into the day without thought, as though existence were merely a race of duties and burdens. Yet the soul was never designed to awaken first to noise. It was designed to awaken first to God. The morning is not merely another portion of time. It is a doorway. It is a sacred threshold standing quietly between heaven and the human soul. Every dawn arrives carrying invisible possibilities, and the way a person steps through that doorway often shapes the spirit of the entire day. The modern world teaches people to rise quickly, move quickly, think quickly, and worry quickly. But heaven does not move with panic. God often speaks in stillness, and the soul that never becomes quiet enough to hear him soon becomes lost in confusion. When a person begins the morning with prayer, they are doing something far greater than reciting religious words. They are aligning the inner life with eternal truth before temporary troubles can distort it. They are reminding the heart that God remains sovereign before fear begins making its speeches. There is a profound difference between entering the day carrying anxiety and entering the day carrying the presence of God. One spirit trembles before uncertainty. The other walks with calm authority even when uncertainty remains. Many people imagine prayer as an emergency tool, something reserved only for moments of disaster. Yet prayer was never meant to be humanity's last resort. It was meant to be humanity's first breath. Especially in the morning, prayer becomes the soul's declaration that life itself does not depend entirely upon human strength. The proud heart wakes and immediately trusts itself. The wise heart wakes and bows before God. There is also something deeply revealing about the fact that darkness always retreats before morning light. Creation itself seems to preach a sermon every sunrise. Night may appear powerful for a season, but it cannot survive the arrival of light. In the same way, many fears lose their grip when a praying soul enters the presence of God at dawn. Problems that seemed enormous at midnight often appear smaller in the morning after prayer, because the soul begins seeing them through heaven's perspective rather than through human weakness. The tragedy of modern life is not merely that people are busy. It is that they are spiritually distracted. They fill the first moments of the day with endless voices, news, worries, messages, responsibilities, yet leave no room for the voice that matters most. The soul slowly becomes exhausted because it consumes information without receiving peace. But morning prayer restores order within the human spirit. It reminds the weary heart that God remains near even in uncertainty, even when we are not sure what to do, then in suffering, even in waiting. To kneel in prayer during the early hours is to acknowledge that every new day is not owed to us, but given to us. Breath itself is a gift. Time itself is mercy. And when a soul understands this, gratitude begins replacing bitterness. The morning becomes less about surviving another day and more about walking with God through another opportunity He has graciously allowed. There are people who enter each morning carrying invisible wounds no one else can see. Some wake with regret, others wake with fear. Some wake already exhausted by burdens that followed them through the night. Yet there is a healing power in bringing those hidden weights before God, before the day fully begins. The sacredness of morning prayer lies partly in this. The soul no longer carries its suffering alone. For when the heart attempts to carry every burden by itself, fear slowly becomes its master. Fear has a quiet way of entering the human spirit before the day even begins. It waits in the shadows of unfinished problems, uncertain futures, painful memories, and invisible anxieties. Many people wake up already defeated, not because the battle has begun, but because fear arrives. Vet first. Before their feet even touch the floor, their minds are already racing toward disappointment, failure, rejection, or loss. And so the soul begins surrendering to darkness long before the sun has fully risen. This is why prayer before sunrise carries such extraordinary power. It breaks fear before fear can fully enter the heart. It interrupts the invasion of despair before despair builds its throne within the mind. The soul that prays early is not pretending life is easy. Rather, it is choosing who will speak first into the day, fear or God. There is a dangerous habit among human beings to believe whatever voice speaks loudest in the morning. If anxiety speaks first, then the entire day becomes shaped by anxiety. If bitterness speaks first, then every conversation becomes poisoned by hidden resentment. If hopelessness speaks first, then even blessings appear meaningless. But when prayer speaks first, something within the soul begins to steady itself. The heart remembers that circumstances are not sovereign. God is. The enemy of peace often works most effectively during the earliest hours because the mind is vulnerable there. Before distractions arrive, hidden worries ND to rise to the surface. A person suddenly remembers unpaid bills, broken relationships, uncertain health, disappointments, or fears about tomorrow. And fear has an astonishing ability to make small shadows appear enormous. It whispers that nothing will improve. It predicts disasters that may never happen. It convinces people to suffer twice, once in imagination and once in reality. Yet prayer has a way of exposing fear as a poor prophet. When a person kneels before God in the quiet of morning, they begin placing eternal truth against temporary panic. Fear says, "You are alone." Prayer reminds the soul that God has never abandoned his children. Fear says, "You will not survive what is coming." Prayer reminds the soul that strength often appears only after obedience. Fear says, "Everything is falling apart." Prayer whispers that perhaps God is rearranging what human beings were never meant to control in the first place. There is also a profound difference between fear that visits the mind and fear that rules the heart. Every human being experiences moments of fear. Even faithful souls tremble at times. Courage was never the absence of fear. Courage is the refusal to let fear become. Om Lord over the Spirit. Morning prayer trains the soul in this holy resistance. It teaches the heart to bow before God instead of bowing before panic. And perhaps this is why the early hours feel so spiritually significant. Before the world awakens, there is an opportunity to establish inward order before outward chaos begins. A praying soul enters the day differently. Not because problems disappear instantly, but because fear no longer occupies the highest seat within the mind. The storm may still exist outside, but prayer quiets the storm within. Many people search endlessly for peace, while ignoring the doorway through which peace often enters. They seek comfort in distractions, achievements, entertainment, possessions, or the approval of others. Yet the soul cannot be healed by noise. It cannot be strengthened merely by activity. Human beings were created for communion with God, and until the heart returns to that communion, restlessness remains. There are mornings when prayer feels powerful and comforting, but there are also mornings when prayer feels difficult, dry, and almost silent. Yet even those silent prayers matter deeply. The discipline of seeking God before sunrise slowly reshapes the soul over time. Fear loses some of its authority. Worry loses some of its poison. The heart becomes less fragile because it is learning to depend upon something greater than emotion. For the one who prays at dawn is quietly building an inner fortress long before the battles of the day arrive. And that inner fortress is not built from human confidence alone. It is built from the assurance that God himself surrounds those who seek him early. There is a form of protection that the world understands locks on doors, walls around cities, armies guarding borders. Yet there is another form of protection far greater and far less visible. It is the unseen covering of God upon a life surrendered to him. Many dismiss such protection because they cannot measure it with human instruments. But the deepest realities of existence have never depended upon human measurement. The soul that seeks God in the morning begins the day under divine awareness rather than spiritual carelessness. Prayer awakens the heart to the reality that life is not merely physical but deeply spiritual. Every day carries unseen influences, hidden temptations, quiet dangers, and moments capable of shaping, eyeing a person's destiny. To rise without prayer is often to walk into battle unaware. But to seek God early is to invite his wisdom, his guidance, and his covering over every unseen path ahead. There are dangers from which people are protected without ever realizing it. Some prayers are answered so quietly that the soul never notices what was prevented. A delayed journey, a changed decision, an unexpected interruption, a closed door that once seemed disappointing. Many of these may have been mercies disguised as inconveniences. Human beings often praise God for visible blessings while remaining unaware of invisible rescues happening constantly around them. And perhaps this explains why Scripture repeatedly speaks of God as a refuge, a fortress, and a shield. These are not merely poetic phrases meant to comfort weak minds. They are descriptions of spiritual reality. The human heart longs desperately for safety because deep within itself, it understands how fragile life truly is. No amount of wealth, intelligence, or influence can fully protect a person from suffering, uncertainty, or mortality. Humanity remains vulnerable despite all its inventions. Yet prayer reminds the soul that limiting security has never depended entirely upon human control. When a person begins the day with prayer, they are acknowledging their dependence upon God's protection rather than their own illusion of self-sufficiency. Pride whispers that human strength alone is enough. Prayer humbly confesses otherwise. It recognizes that wisdom can fail, plans can collapse, health can weaken, and circumstances can change suddenly. But God remains constant when everything else trembles. There is also a protection that prayer creates within the mind itself. Not every danger arrives through physical events. Some dangers arrive through thoughts that slowly poison the spirit: resentment, despair, jealousy, hatred, temptation, bitterness. A person may appear outwardly safe while inwardly collapsing. Morning prayer acts like a cleansing wind moving through the soul before corruption settles too deeply. It reminds the heart what truly matters. It realigns desires that have begun drifting towards selfishness or fear. The modern world often celebrates independence as the highest virtue, yet complete independence from God eventually leaves the soul spiritually exposed. Human beings were never designed to carry existence alone. The branch separated from the tree may appear alive for a short time, but death quietly begins the moment separation occurs. In the same way, the soul disconnected from communion with God gradually loses its strength, even if outward success continues for a season. Those who pray early discover something remarkable over time. God's protection is not always the removal of difficulty. Sometimes His protection is the strength to endure difficulty without being destroyed by it. There are storms God calms around us, and there are storms He calms within us. Both are acts of mercy. The praying soul slowly learns that divine protection does not mean a life without pain, but a life where pain never has final authority. Many people imagine protection only in dramatic terms, yet often God protects a soul quietly through wisdom. Morning prayer sharpens spiritual discernment. It helps a person recognize harmful influences before becoming entangled in them. It softens anger before harsh words are spoken. It restrains impulses that would later produce regret. It creates pauses where destruction might otherwise have rushed forward unchecked. And in those sacred early hours, before the world fully awakens, the soul begins to understand that true safety is not found merely in favorable circumstances. True safety is found in walking closely with God through whatever circumstances may come. For the soul that walks closely with God begins to experience a transformation far deeper than outward safety alone. Protection is not merely about surviving dangers, it is also about preserving the inner life from becoming hardened, exhausted, or spiritually empty. Many people continue living physically, while inwardly they are fading. Their minds are crowded, their spirits weary, and their hearts burdened by constant pressure. The world moves quickly, and in its relentless motion, it slowly drains the human soul of clarity, wonder, and peace. This is why morning prayer becomes not only a shield for the day, but also a source of renewal for the weary spirit. The human mind was never created to carry endless anxiety without rest. Yet countless people awaken each day already mentally exhausted. Their thoughts feel scattered before the morning has even fully begun. Worries from yesterday blend with fears about tomorrow until the present moment becomes almost impossible to inhabit peacefully. The tragedy is not simply that people are tired, but that many no longer know how to recover inwardly. They rest their bodies while leaving their souls neglected. Prayer renews the mind because it returns the soul to its proper center. A mind left alone with fear eventually becomes trapped within itself. Human thoughts, when separated from divine truth, often spiral endlessly in circles of confusion. One anxious thought produces another until the heart becomes consumed by heaviness. But prayer interrupts that cycle. It lifts the mind beyond its own limited understanding and places it before the eternal wisdom of God. There is a quiet healing that takes place when a person sits before God in the early hours and allows silence to replace chaos. The modern world fears silence because silence exposes what distractions often conceal. Yet God frequently restores the soul not through noise, but through stillness. The weary mind gradually becomes calmer. The restless heart begins breathing differently. Thoughts once tangled in fear slowly loosen their grip. Prayer does not always change circumstances immediately, but it often changes the condition of the soul because in those circumstances. Morning prayer also renews spiritual strength because it reminds human beings of who they truly are. Much of human exhaustion comes from forgetting this. People define themselves by failures, disappointments, titles, opinions, or temporary conditions. They carry labels spoken over them by painful experiences or careless voices. Some secretly believe they are weak because life has wounded them repeatedly. Others feel unworthy because they remember their past too clearly. But in prayer, the soul returns to the gaze of God rather than the judgment of the world, and there is tremendous strength in being seen by God correctly. The world often measures strength through outward achievement, power, or control. Yet spiritual strength is something entirely different. It is the ability to remain faithful when circumstances tempt surrender. It is the ability to continue loving when bitterness would feel easier. It is the ability to hope while walking through uncertainty. Such strength cannot be manufactured merely through positive thinking. It grows through communion with God. This is why those who truly pray in the morning often carry a certain steadiness throughout, until the day. Others may not understand it. Their lives are not perfect, nor are they free from struggle, but there is an inward anchor holding them together. When disappointments arrive, they do not collapse as easily. When fear approaches, it does not dominate as completely. When difficulties increase, they possess a deeper endurance than before. Prayer has slowly strengthened parts of the soul that panic once controlled. There is also renewal in the simple act of surrender itself. Much of human exhaustion comes from attempting to control everything. The mind endlessly calculates outcomes, rehearses conversations, predicts disasters, and clings desperately to certainty. But prayer teaches the soul to release what it was never meant to carry alone. To surrender before God each morning is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is the recognition that human beings are finite creatures trying to navigate a world far larger than themselves. And strangely, the soul becomes strongest precisely when it stops pretending to be self-sufficient. For God often restores people not when they display the greatest confidence in themselves, but when they finally acknowledge their dependence upon Him. In those sacred morning moments, strength quietly returns to the weary heart, clarity returns to the troubled mind, and peace begins settling over the soul like light spreading across the earth at dawn. And as that light spreads quietly across the earth, the soul begins to realize that many of the greatest battles in life are invisible to everyone else. Human beings often imagine conflict only in outward terms: financial struggles, broken relationships, disappointments, sickness, opposition from others. Yet beneath these visible difficulties there are deeper battles constantly taking place within the human spirit. Battles against despair, battles against temptation, battles against bitterness, pride, fear, and hopelessness. Some of the fiercest wars are fought silently behind smiling faces, where no human eye can fully see the exhaustion hidden within. This is why the quiet hours with God become so essential. They prepare the soul for battles others cannot see. There are wounds people carry that words cannot easily explain. Some have been betrayed so deeply that trust itself feels dangerous. Others live beneath constant pressure, feeling as though every day demands more strength than they possess. Some wrestle with secret fears they never speak aloud because they are afraid of appearing weak. And many move through life carrying loneliness even while surrounded by crowds. The outward person continues functioning, but inwardly the soul feels weary from fighting unseen struggles day after day. Morning prayer becomes the hidden place where strength is restored before those battles intensify. The world often notices public victories while remaining blind to private preparation. Yet no soul stands firmly in difficult moments accidentally. Spiritual endurance is usually built quietly, long before trials appear. The person who remains calm during chaos is often someone who has already knelt before God in silence, while no one else was watching. There is something profoundly humbling about realizing how little control human beings truly possess. A single conversation can alter the direction of a day. A single temptation can weaken years of discipline. A single season of suffering can test even the strongest heart. Human nature is fragile, and the soul that ignores this fragility eventually becomes vulnerable to pride. But the soul that prays each morning remembers its dependence upon God before entering the uncertainties ahead. Prayer also sharpens spiritual awareness. Many battles are lost not because people lack intelligence, but because they fail to recognize what is happening within themselves. Anger quietly grows unchecked. Envy slowly poisons gratitude. Temptation enters through small compromises. Discouragement deepens because the soul becomes isolated from God's presence. Morning prayer creates a sacred pause where the heart can examine itself honestly before heaven. And honesty before God is one of the rarest forms of courage. Most people spend their lives pretending to others, and often to themselves. They hide weakness beneath appearances, conceal pain beneath routines, and mask fear beneath busyness. But prayer strips away illusion. In the presence of God, the soul no longer needs to perform. It can speak openly about exhaustion, confusion, disappointment, and weakness. Strangely enough, it is often there, in honest surrender, that the deepest strength begins forming. The battles others cannot see are frequently the ones that shape destiny most powerfully. A public failure may wound a reputation, but a private corruption wounds the soul itself. This is why prayer matters so profoundly in the early hours. Before the temptations of the day arrive, the heart has already been reminded of truth. Before anger has an opportunity to rule, the soul has already sat in the presence of mercy. Before discouragement grows too heavy, the spirit has already drawn strength from God. And there are moments in life when outward circumstances offer no immediate answers. Some prayers seem delayed. Some wounds take longer to heal. Some doors remain closed despite faithful effort. In such seasons, people often become spiritually exhausted because they expect quick resolutions to every struggle. Yet the quiet hours with God teach the soul endurance. They teach a person to remain faithful even while waiting, to continue trusting even without complete understanding. This quiet endurance is not weakness. It is one of the strongest things a human being can possess. For a soul deeply rooted in prayer becomes harder to destroy, not because suffering disappears, but because suffering no longer has absolute power over the heart. The storms of life may continue raging outwardly, yet inwardly the soul has learned where refuge is found. And when the unseen battles of the day finally arrive, the praying heart does not enter them empty-handed. It carries within itself the strength, wisdom, and presence of God quietly gathered during those sacred morning hours, and it is in those sacred morning hours that the soul slowly learns one of the greatest truths of the spiritual life. A life changed by prayer does not begin with dramatic miracles alone, but with daily surrender at dawn. Human beings often desire transformation while resisting surrender. They long for peace without releasing control. They seek purpose without obedience. They ask God to change their circumstances while fiercely protecting the very habits, fears, and desires that keep them spiritually restless. Yet God rarely transforms a life built entirely upon self-will. True change begins when the soul bows. There is something deeply symbolic about surrendering to God in the morning. Before the day unfolds, before plans are pursued, before ambitions begin demanding attention, the praying soul pauses and says, in essence, Lord, this day belongs first to you. Such surrender may appear small in the eyes of the world, yet spiritually it is enormous. It reorders the heart correctly. It places God upon the throne instead of human pride, fear, or desire. The modern world often presents surrender as weakness because it worships independence above nearly everything else. People are taught to trust themselves absolutely, rely solely upon personal ambition, and pursue complete control over their lives. But the human soul was never created to carry the weight of ultimate control. This is why so many people remain inwardly anxious even while appearing successful outwardly. They are attempting to govern alone what only God can truly sustain. Morning prayer gently dismantles this illusion. Every sincere prayer contains an act of surrender hidden within it. To pray is to admit limitation. It is to confess that human wisdom alone is insufficient. It is to acknowledge that life contains mysteries far beyond personal understanding. Yet strangely, this surrender does not weaken the soul, it liberates it. The person who releases absolute control to God often discovers a deeper peace than the person desperately trying to manage every possible outcome. A life changed by prayer is usually transformed gradually, rather than instantly. Human beings often expect spiritual growth to arrive suddenly, like lightning across the sky. But God frequently works more like the sunrise, slowly, steadily, quietly spreading light where darkness once ruled. A praying person may not notice change immediately. Yet over time, old fears begin losing their authority. Bitterness softens, wisdom deepens, destructive habits weaken. The heart becomes more patient, more discerning, more compassionate. This transformation happens because daily surrender allows God continual access to the inner life. There are people who pray only when circumstances collapse, but surrender means seeking God even when life appears stable. It means recognizing that dependence upon God is not seasonal but constant. The soul that truly understands prayer no longer views it merely as an emergency response. Prayer becomes relationship, communion, daily alignment between the human heart and divine truth. And perhaps this is why morning surrender carries such unusual power. The beginning of the day often reveals what rules the soul most deeply. Some wake immediately consumed by ambition. Others wake ruled by anxiety. Some rise burdened by regret or resentment. But the surrendered heart rises seeking God first. Not because life is easy, but because it understands that without God, the soul eventually drifts into confusion, pride, or despair. There is also a hidden freedom in surrender that many people never discover. Human beings exhaust themselves trying to preserve images of strength before others. They fear appearing weak, uncertain, or dependent. Yet before God, the soul no longer needs to pretend. It can confess its fears honestly. It can admit weariness openly. And in that humility, healing often begins. For God does not usually transform the proud heart that believes it needs nothing. He transforms the surrendered heart willing to be led. Morning prayer gradually teaches the soul obedience in small moments, and these small moments often shape destiny more than dramatic events do. A surrendered spirit becomes slower to react in anger, slower to chase temptation, slower to speak carelessly. Prayer creates inward awareness before outward action. It softens impulses that once ruled unchecked. The soul becomes less controlled by emotion and more guided by wisdom. And over time, something beautiful begins happening within the person who daily surrenders. Before dawn, their relationship with God stops feeling distant or occasional. His presence becomes woven into ordinary life itself. The morning no longer feels like the beginning of another meaningless routine, but the beginning of another walk with God through a world still filled with uncertainty, suffering, beauty, and grace. And as that walk with God continues day after day, the soul begins to change in ways the world cannot easily explain. There are people who move through life carrying a different kind of presence about them. Not arrogance, not pride, not the loud confidence that demands attention, but a quiet steadiness that seems untouched by much of the chaos surrounding them. They speak differently, they endure differently, they respond to hardship differently. Something about them feels anchored beyond circumstance. And often the hidden reason is this: they have learned to start the day with God. Those who begin the morning with God eventually walk differently through the world. The difference may not appear dramatic at first. In fact, it is usually subtle. But subtle things often possess the greatest power. A tree does not become strong in a single storm. Strength forms slowly through deep roots hidden beneath the surface. In the same way, the praying soul develops an inward depth that cannot always be seen immediately, yet reveals itself over time through character, wisdom, endurance, and peace. The world trains people to react constantly. To every insult, respond quickly. To every fear, panic immediately. To every disappointment, lose hope. Human beings become spiritually restless because they are governed by whatever emotion rises strongest in the moment. But those who seek God early each morning slowly become less controlled by impulse. Prayer creates space between emotion and action. It teaches the soul to pause before speaking, to discern before deciding, and to trust before surrendering to fear. This is why people who genuinely walk with God often carry a certain calmness even during difficulty. It is not that they feel no pain. They grieve, struggle, and grow weary like everyone else. But beneath those human emotions, there exists a deeper foundation holding them steady. Their peace does not entirely depend upon favorable circumstances, because it was built in communion with God long before the storm arrived. And storms reveal foundatio, NS. Many people appear strong while life remains comfortable, yet collapse inwardly when suffering enters unexpectedly. Others possess very little outwardly, yet endure tremendous hardship with remarkable faithfulness. The difference is often spiritual depth. Morning prayer slowly builds this depth within the soul, not through dramatic displays but through daily consistency. Every dawn spent with God strengthens the inner life little by little, until eventually the person begins carrying heaven's influence into ordinary human moments. The way they speak changes because prayer softens harshness. The way they treat others changes because communion with God humbles pride. The way they face uncertainty changes because trust gradually replaces constant fear. Even their understanding of success begins changing. The world defines success through status, possessions, recognition, and power. But the soul shaped by prayer begins valuing peace above applause, character above image, and faithfulness above worldly admiration. There is also a quiet courage that develops within those who walk closely with God. The world often mistakes courage for loudness, but some of the bravest people are deeply gentle. They no longer need to prove themselves constantly because their identity has become rooted in something eternal rather than fragile human approval. Morning prayer reminds them daily who they belong to, and this frees them from much of the insecurity that controls others. And perhaps one of the greatest changes is this: the praying soul begins noticing God everywhere. Not merely in churches or moments of crisis, but in ordinary existence itself, in the sunrise breaking through darkness, in unexpected mercy during difficult seasons, in strength that arrives exactly when needed, in quiet moments of peace that make no logical sense. The world no longer appears empty or random. Life becomes filled with sacred meaning because the heart has awakened to God's presence moving continually through it. This does not mean the praying person becomes perfect. There will still be failures, weaknesses, and moments of doubt. Yet even in failure, they return more quickly to God instead of wandering endlessly into despair. Prayer has taught them that grace is greater than human weakness. And because of this, they rise again differently after every fall. Those who start the day with God gradually carry eternity within their ordinary lives. Their steps become steadier. Their hearts become softer. Their spirits become stronger. And though the world around them may remain troubled and uncertain, they continue walking through it with a peace that cannot easily be explained. Because every morning before the world awakened, they first learned how to walk with God.